The great houses of the Inner Sphere have spent centuries fighting with one another for supremacy. A wide range of units are employed in their conquests, the most prestigious of which are the battle mechs, the knights in shining armour of the modern era. Each of these diverse regiments have their own history, traditions, and name. Understanding the terminology behind these names could mean the difference between life and death on the battlefield. An ignorant commander could find themselves facing a very different threat than they had anticipated. This video aims to shed light on the nomenclature used by the different units in the 31st century. It won't cover in depth the organisational doctrine of the Great Houses, its purpose is just to focus on the terminology alone. Prospective mercenary commanders may also find this video useful in naming their new commands appropriately. It's worth saying before we begin that this isn't an exact science, there are always exceptions to the rule. The older brigades in particular have had more time to evolve their own reputation and tactics that no longer align with their name. It pays to stay informed on the particulars of all units stationed within your region. While a few regiments have names sourced from antiquity, most are derived from the Napoleonic era of Terran history, including infantry and cavalry formations. Their physical resemblance to the former explains the connection there, while their speed, stature, and status more closely aligns with the horseback riders of eras gone by. Indeed, they perform many similar functions on the battlefield. We'll begin our overview by discussing the terms that indicate a unit's place within the larger military, rather than the nature of its composition. The first distinction to make is between regulars and irregulars. All regiments will either be one or the other, though most adopt some other name. If a unit is composed of career soldiers fighting for their home nation and follows the standard internal structure, then they will be classed as regulars. A unit is irregular if that is not the case. It might be formed from differently sized family units, its command structure might break from the norms, or it might have internal subcommands with very different origins. Such forces are frequently referred to as auxiliaries when fighting alongside regulars. Partisans are also sometimes described as irregulars, though they could be anything from a small band of guerrillas to a large armed mob. Mercenaries are the quintessential irregulars, as they fall outside of the standard chain of command, and don't rely on the same logistical network or support structure. But another example would be the armed forces of the fractured Capellan Confederation. The old regiments have been smashed and broken many times over. The survivors formed into hybrids that are both regulars within the CCAF, but irregular in their composition. Other terms frequently used for the same purpose are group or legion. The Draconis Combine in particular distinguished its free-floating regiments in such fashion. The soldiers who fight in one of these units are known as legionnaires. One point of confusion might come from the legions and legionaries of ancient Rome, which would have been the regulars of their day. The Guards moniker, or its derivative Guardian, is theoretically used to reflect units whose loyalty and prestige are among the highest in their respective militaries. However, the flip side of this is that many of the palace guards of antiquity were looked down upon by the line regiments. They were good for dressing sharply and putting on a parade, but in actual combat, their inexperience often showed. This remains at least partially true for several brigades in service today. A cadre, or cadre as it's said in some dialects, is a small band or following. Its use among mech regiments is almost always used to denote those forces fielded by the premier military academies of the Inner Sphere. Smaller training battalions don't usually refer to themselves as a cadre, only the larger regiments. Militia is the term most frequently used to describe those forces defending their local system. They don't belong to any of the standing armies and are not expected to be deployed to any world but their own. Most have regular day jobs and only pick up a weapon to fend off an attacker. There are two notable exceptions. The Federated Suns organise the best of their planetary militias into march militias, which move to hotspots within their combat region or defence zone. Furthermore, the Free Worlds League has a fully mobilised Marek militia, which serves all across the realm as a frontline regiment. Other terms used to represent mobilised militias include defenders, patriots, and volunteers. Moving on to the different forms of regiment, we'll cover the infantry first, starting with the more prestigious formations. In the Napoleonic era, they fell into two main categories, line or light. The former represented the main body of the army's strength, while the latter used speed and manoeuvrability to support the advance. Grenadiers, or Grenadiers in English, were the military elite, composed of the tallest and strongest soldiers. They were frequently within the vanguard, often some of the best trained, and were particularly adept at storming fortifications. Though they fought alongside other line regiments in large battles, they were also regularly broken off and given their own objectives or tasked with a breakthrough on the flank. By tradition, they are often the showpiece regiments of their entire military. Mech Grenadiers are likely to prioritise maximum firepower and tonnage at the expense of speed. The opposite number to the heavy Grenadiers were the Voltigeurs or Volters. The name stemmed from their original concept as foot infantry that would ride into battle on the back of cavalry units and then leap off to fight on foot. This proved ineffective in practice, but their advanced training meant that future forces bearing the name would become the elite of the light infantry. Their tactics included the specific targeting of officers to induce confusion and demoralise the common soldiers. Modern-day Voltigeurs are likely to be both skilled combatants and have wide access to jump-capable mechs. Within the Grenadiers and Voltigeurs were a select few companies known as the Vélites. Historically, they were auxiliaries within the Roman army that manoeuvred around the heavy infantry to throw javelins from safe positions, but in Napoleon's day, they were the sons of wealthy families that paid a premium to place their children in prestigious but safer units. The term is rarely used in the 31st century, but again implies a well-trained force, probably striking from range with possible links to the nobility. Carabiniers, or Carabiniers, were so named for the short carbines they carried into battle. These lightweight firearms allowed them to advance quickly, making them excellent assault troops. They were the inverse of the Grenadiers in that oftentimes the smaller individuals would be assigned to these units. The term is not commonly used by BattleMech regiments, but would likely indicate a regiment of brawlers equipped with primarily short-range weapons. Fusiliers were named for the fusil, originally an old musket design, but later adopted as the French word for rifle. In Napoleon's day, these had become the standard line regiments of the army. They were medium-weight units that worked best in large formations. Fusiliers should not be confused with their English translation, riflemen or simply rifles. Despite the name, they retain the older, less accurate muskets, their deficits offset by the increased rate of fire they offered. Modern Fusiliers are probably middleweight regiments that sacrifice speed for raw hitting power. Light infantry were expected to move ahead or to the side of main formations. They acted as pickets, scouts, and screening forces. They were equipped with the lighter and more accurate rifles instead of the standard muskets, allowing them to use range and terrain to their advantage. A few BattleMech units do use the term light infantry, reflecting more their role on the battlefield than their equipment, but this is a rarity for the obvious confusion it can cause. Chasseurs, meaning hunter, or more literally chaser, were the standard light infantry of their day. They used the accuracy offered by their superior weapons to engage from longer range. It is the Chasseurs, not the Fusiliers, that the British rifles were equivalent to. The two units were the quintessential light infantry of the Napoleonic era. Firepower and manoeuvrability allow the light mechs of the modern Chasseurs to outperform heavier units. Tirailleurs, or skirmishers, is not a term in common use anymore, at least not for mainline regiments. Their equipment was similar to other light infantry, but they were trained to only engage in brief harassing attacks. They would frequently operate independently, away from any larger formations, to strike at targets of opportunity. BattleMech skirmishers would engage from long range and then use speed to withdraw before being dragged into a prolonged engagement. Jägers, or rangers, would have once had jobs as huntsmen or groundskeepers. This made them some of the best marksmen in the army. When serving with the military, they would have fought apart from the main concentration of troops in small unit actions. Their provincial heritage is reflected by those units of the Iron Commonwealth that use the terms today. Commandos were units that excelled fighting in small groups or even individually. Their missions would often see them acting without heavier support. The term is most commonly used to refer to special forces, but a few regiments have adopted the name to reflect their skill and individuality. A few types of infantry formations had counterparts within the cavalry, especially those representing the military elite. To distinguish between them, the French terms à pied or à cheval are appended to the title, meaning on foot or on horseback. When the latter is used today, it can often reflect BattleMechs that are either quicker or heavier. To avoid confusion, it's worth clarifying that in the 31st century, the specific term cavalry is most often used to represent fast conventional armour, such as hovercraft, though a few BattleMechs fulfill the same purpose. There are a handful of brigades that perform this function using mechs. Cavaliers is another term derived from cavalrymen, again reflecting a unit that values swiftness. Cuirassiers, or their English derivatives Cuirassiers, sometimes said Cuirassiers, were heavy cavalry units that wore breastplates into battle, a rarity in the Napoleonic era. The only others to do so were the Carabiniers à cheval. They rode the largest steeds and fought in tight formations. Those battle mech units that use the terms are likely to feature many heavy and assault mechs that favour armour above all else. Chevaliers, Chevaliers, or the English knights, were heavy cavalry of the medieval era. In their day, the individual riders would have been feudal lords in their own right. The inner sphere uses many different terms for knighthoods and nobility, and so units bearing the name Chevalier reflect more their use as armoured cavalry, typically heavier mechs with a balance of speed, firepower and armour. The phrase heavy horse, though rarely used, would indicate much the same. Dragoon, the French word for dragon, were the medium cavalry of the Napoleonic era. They lacked the armour of their heavier counterparts, but rode the same large destriers. More recently, the heavy assault regiments of the Stalag Defence Force would adopt the more fanciful Dragoon moniker when operating independently of larger units. Because of this, modern Dragoons are regularly heavier forces than their historical counterparts, and they often include the elite of a given military. Grenadiers à cheval were similarly equipped and qualified. The Hussars were another medium cavalry force, best known for their fanciful dress. They would frequently operate away from the main army in harassing attacks. The SLDF would use the term to describe their independent battle regiments of medium to heavy tonnage. Versatility is the order of the day for Hussar regiments, which also remain some of the most prestigious within their respective militaries. The light mechs of the former SLDF were organised into striker regiments. The independent equivalent was the light horse. A few of these Stalag units still survive into the modern era as elite mercenaries. A millennia ago, light cavalry had the role of scouting ahead of larger formations, intercepting enemy scouts, or skirting around behind troop concentrations to target vulnerable supplies or artillery. Speed was an essential quality for these missions, something which remains true to this day. Occasionally, regiments will use the French term for light horse, Chevau Léger, and the Chasseurs à cheval were some of the best light cavalry of their day. In the Napoleonic era, those horseback soldiers who specialised in chasing down and eliminating other cavalry elements were known as lancers, so named for the lance they carried. Their origins lay with the Uhlans of Eastern Europe. Battle mechs by their nature are extremely versatile and can be tasked with a wide variety of objectives, but those regiments that specialise in the destruction of other mech units are known as lancers or Uhlans. While historically they would have ridden small but fast horses, the modern lancers use a full range of weight classes, their name reflecting their training more than their equipment. We'll end our review by mentioning those words that indicate a unit's origins or heritage. Borderers, as the name suggests, are raised from the populations of worlds along a given border. Highlanders are those units with Scottish ancestry.